Good morning, everybody. We're gonna, I understand that the commissioner cannot be with us. We've invited the new, are they called teams, that the governor has appointed to work on the 1099 issue. They're gonna join us, or at least Brittany Wilson will join us tomorrow to give an update on um, what they're learning and how they're approaching it, and also have the ability to hear from us in terms of our concerns and what we're hearing from constituents. We will have Doug Hoffer on very briefly at 9:30. He too, they're all on learning curves, obviously. They were just appointed yesterday. Uh, uh, he too is trying to get his arms around how he's going to approach this. But I'm sure we have questions and we'll spend a little time with Doug. One of the things I wanted to do this morning until Damien can join us is hear from Cameron Wood. I apologize. I thought that, I'm not sure, I'm still not sure whether you got earlier in the week the UI annual report, but if you didn't, I sent it out last night. And I was hoping Cameron could walk us through that. It's a good, it's a fairly well, I think it's fairly, um, it's not too much in the weeds. So it gives a good overview of where the trust fund is right now and how we got there and what kind of policies impact the ups and downs in the fund and how much we can afford to, if anything, to change the contributions and benefits in the system, uh, just in terms of a framework here to ground us. I think you all know that the administration is pushing for rate relief for businesses in at least two fashions. One is to freeze that 1 through 5 category in the matrix, keep it at 1 for another year as opposed to it going to 5, which it would do if we don't touch it, and also to leave the base period earnings on which taxes are paid at around 14.1 as opposed to where it would go to 16.1 for a year. So we're going to have to hear from Matt Barowitz as to how much that's going to cost the fund and how much jeopardy that might put the fund in as if we accept the governor's recommendation. And I think I've been consistent throughout in terms of the so-called grand bargain from a decade ago that I would like to see some balancing here. It's not only the business community that's hurting, it's recipients that are hurting as well. So I'd like to see some help for beneficiaries as well as for businesses. So let's turn it over to Cameron. I gave him a heads up very early this morning that I might want him to do this, but I was sure he was integral in writing the report. So I'm sure he can do well, a good job in walking us through it.
Oh, good morning, Cameron.
Good morning, Cameron.
Morning. I hope everybody is doing well.
Well, we hope you are.
Yeah, actually, I should start off before you get into that. Do you have any nuggets for us? Any
Yeah.
updates at all on the 1099 situation in the last
12 hours.
12 hours or 18 hours since we last spoke?
Right. I do not at this point, Mr. Chair. I definitely think I would probably leave that, especially to Brittany Wilson if she's coming in tomorrow to speak to you. I can say that, we've created teams to try to tackle different areas. As you saw yesterday, the governor has appointed individuals from his team to come in to assist the department. So we're trying to move forward on all fronts at the same time. Recapturing the 1099s that were issued, ensuring that we're moving forward with a form of credit monitoring, credit protection for individuals who've been compromised, and also then needing to reissue the corrected 1099s. So we have different teams that are approaching each of those tasks. We're also beginning already to look at after actions. What went wrong, what was the process, what did we do, and how do we improve that. I know that the governor's also, spoken to the state auditor about this, and I know you'll have him on this morning. So, also trying to put the legwork in place for how do we ensure that this doesn't happen again? How do we ensure we put process in place to where we do everything we can to prevent this from happening again? Obviously, the priority items are those first three tasks, recapturing protection for Vermonters and reissuing of the 1099s. So we've made some progress. We met for, I'd say the vast majority of yesterday in some form or another on one of the tasks. And obviously our priorities today will be integrating the governor's team in, as you said, getting them up to speed. Some of them have some experience with unemployment, so I think the ramp up may not be as steep, but some of them do not. So trying to get them integrated as quickly as possible. And so I try not to use words
Right.
as, I'm happy with the progress we've made given the thing that we're trying to address, but I feel like we're making some substantial progress. I know it's never going to be quick enough, but
Good. So let me just ask you, I know you said you didn't have much to offer, but you opened the door to at least a question or two, because I did write to the Attorney General this morning to get a little greater clarity. I woke up this morning thinking that I didn't fully understand what you referred to as the support people who may have been compromised can get in the outside world in terms of protection against identity theft. And I was wondering what commercial vehicles are out there and how much they cost. I know there was an initial figure of $7 million for the state to pay for those services. And I listened to the Appropriations Committee tape yesterday, and I learned that that figure, nobody knows where it came from and is not correct. So now we have to figure out how much we're going to put forward in state resources to help people who have been impacted. And my understanding is that the Appropriations Committee is willing to fund that. I don't know where the governor is on that, but do you, and we're going to, Charity Clark wrote me back saying she's going to get us something in writing before 9:30 to round that out a little bit. But do you have any information on what kind of services those are, or maybe Senator Brock knows that, or how much they cost? And again, we're going to obviously have to figure out how many people need those services, but
right. So I'll give you the very limited information that I have. I know the commissioner has testified that individuals can put a freeze on their credit, which should be of no cost to themselves, which is one way for them to protect themselves. As far as our ability to provide some sort of monitoring services, we have in the past done this on a very limited basis. And, in some of the vendors that we've worked with, we've seen costs of $100, a little over $100. So naturally, we'll be looking at all available options to us, and if there's any way for us to bring those costs down. Now, I don't know what's available right now. I don't know all the different services that are available. I don't know what other states may have used and what their rates are. So I'm sure that some of that number may very well fluctuate, but just kind of, very, very beginning, very back of the napkin, very just, what is the potential exposure here fiscally? Just if we took the number of mailings that went out and wanted to multiply them by 100, for every 10,000 claimants, it's $1 million. So, I think that's just kind of my
I appreciate
my
that.
thought there.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that I appreciate the fact that you responded so quickly to our concern about getting a visual on the opening of your website that people could click on and go to updates on this. But I think it's indicative of the point I was trying to make yesterday, is that we as legislators and being close to constituents have some feel that perhaps value added from what you might have in terms of what needs to be communicated out there. So I hope you'll continue to work with us, and when we have ideas like that, you'll take them seriously. So
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, I just add something for Cameron. I mean, I think we mentioned this yesterday, Cameron, but a number of we are in the process of gathering questions that sort of common questions that constituents are asking, and that might help feed into a good question and answer FAQ sheet. I mean, I know you started one, but we've got some additional ones.
And I would just say to that, Senator Clarkson, real quick, I've received a few of those. I've even received a few of those questions from some of the committee members here, and just know that we will get back to you as quickly as we can. But, one of the things we're also trying to do is make sure, Senator Clarkson, I think as you're alluding to, if you're asking the question or your constituents are asking the question, the public probably doesn't have the answer either. And so taking those questions and making sure we're getting them compiled and available for everybody is priority number one.
And we don't want to get we want to work together here.
Yeah.
So if we're going to put together a question and answer document, it shouldn't be one from the legislature, another one online for the department. It should be the same question and answer sheet. So we don't want to confuse people anymore.
That's part of why I mention it, is that it would be great to make sure we're working hand in glove on that.
Okay. I want to welcome Matt. Matt, we're going to go through the annual report, and I guess Cameron's going to lead, but feel free to jump in wherever you feel it might be appropriate or necessary. So let's start with that, Cameron.
Senator, if you're okay with it, I really want to be able to tag team this with Matt. I don't want to take the lead. A lot of this information actually comes from Matt and his shop, and I think we tend to work really well together. So if you're okay with it, Mr. Chair, I'm going to let Matt start us off, if that's okay. Matt, I don't know if that's where you were giving me the pause for.
Right, exactly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Barowitz, Economic and Labor Market Information Director for the Vermont Department of Labor. I need to situate childcare for just 2 minutes. I wasn't sure if I was going to be used today, so if you'll give me 2 minutes, I'll be right back.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I can start here just with a little background. So, I know the majority of your committee is familiar with the UI system and the report, but, especially for Senator Rahm here, annually we're required to provide, this trust fund report is really what it has turned into. And, we try to be a little bit comprehensive in what's going on the past year, but we also try to recognize that it really is trying to drive out what is what is in the trust fund, what is the projection of the trust fund looking forward. We tried to put in here, for the years since I've been here, we've always tried to keep as much historical information in the report as possible. I think it gets a little repetitive for the people who read it every year, but I think it's important if somebody just takes it off the shelf and looks at a snapshot to help us determine how we got here. And so we do try to keep a lot of the information from the last recession in the report, because it really has driven how we've gotten to where we're at today. So, and there's a lot of, I think, historical context on the grand bargain in the report that we can talk about. But I know a lot of this is somewhat out the window with the circumstances we're in with COVID. So Matt's back. Matt, I was just giving some quick notes on the trust fund report, and I'll turn it over to you so you can start.
And Matt, before you start, I think you missed a little bit of my introduction, so I hope you can weave this in. We know the administration has some proposals to freeze the 1 through 5 categories and the base wages, and this is in part the beginning of that discussion. I mean, especially that one last chart in the report, which shows the difference between contributions and benefits, and how that really sort of skyrockets the amount of money in the fund. I was looking at that chart and wondering how come the fund is projected to go up to $1 billion so quickly when those lines are fairly comparable. But, to the extent there's $100 million difference each year, that's what drives the number and the health of the trust fund. So anyhow, if you can weave that into the discussion, that would be great.
Yes, good morning all. Thank you for that moment. Just let me get settled here. Thursday mornings tend to be a little bit hectic in that regard. The one part...
We're impressed you settled it as quickly as you did.
Yes. The one part I think is important to start with, because this was news to me, and I was part of or barely around at the end of the 2010 quote unquote grand bargain. And Cam, upon reviewing this information, when he looked at this forecast, made a valid point that as written, and we confirmed with Damien, that as written in the grand bargain, every time the schedule drops from tax schedule 4 or 5 down to tax schedule 3, there'll be a $2,000 decrease in the taxable wage base. Similar, that trigger is also set so that if the trust fund gets to tax schedule 1, there'll be, again, a comparable $2,000 decrease to the taxable wage base. I start there because that was not my impression initially. I'm not a lawyer and I tend to stay away from statutes if I can, but I just wanted to make sure the chair understood that, because I know you have a deep understanding of this information. And for me, I always thought the grand bargain was kind of a one and done. But as written in current statute, that stuff lingers on. So it is incorporated into this report, and those were some last minute changes that occurred because of Cam's keen eye and our confirmation and discussions with Damien on that. So I just want to make sure you understand that, which is why those boxes get highlighted. So that's my kind of preamble to kick us off. Really, discussion about the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund really can't start without a discussion about a global health pandemic and how that is the driver of this economic downturn. So hopefully, upon reviewing this report, if you have, it is clearly laid out all through there that I am not a person who's an expert in global health. So, you know, we've had to kind of put together some basic assumptions about how COVID will be dealt with and addressed. But truly, from an economic standpoint, a long-term sustainable economic recovery cannot begin until COVID-19 is behind us, at least in some sort of material fashion, if that makes sense. So with that, Mr. Chair is right that when we start looking at how this forecast is going to go, the trust fund rebounds quite quickly. But if you look at the graph that is on page 8, showing the actual history of the trust fund, where we show that, through the late 90s, the trust fund was rising. And then even during the good years of the 2000s, the trust fund was declining. And this is what ultimately led to the large decline in 2009 when we hit an economic recession. So even during good years, the trust fund was going down. So that was something that was kind of leading the conversation in advance, so that I think that really helped in terms of the ability to react once the trust fund went negative. But if you look at how the trust fund responded after the grand bargain, starting in 2013 forward, this is that same rate. I had the same questions the chair did about this forecast of looking at how fast the trust fund recovers and accumulates money. But this is similar to this pace that you're seeing here from 2013 to 2019. We accumulated nearly $400 million into the trust fund over that short 5 to 6 year period. So this is something that has been demonstrated to occur. So I think that gives us some comfort that it could occur again. Obviously, this leads back to prior discussions we've had regarding what is the appropriate amount in the trust fund. I know during the 2000s, the number will always seem to be around, we need about $300 million. And then, when we got through 2015, 16, 17, and we were starting to get above that, people were trying to hold the line saying, well, let's see how the grand bargain works out. We're not sure when the next recession will happen. But certainly once it started getting above $400 million, people started saying, hey, is this too much in the trust fund? At least to my ears, I was hearing that on the side. But obviously that situation only put us in a good spot, as good a spot as we could have been in, considering the economic downturn that we are about to face. So talk about I liken it to almost like Lord of the Rings with the walls of Helm's Deep. We built a $500 million trust fund getting ready to take on the biggest surge ever known to man and or mankind, or personkind, I guess is more appropriate. Trying to continue the Lord of the Rings references, and they're outdated. You see that the trust fund basically took half a hit, right? So it took, we went from $500 million to about $250 million over the course of 1 year. There's an unprecedented level of unemployment insurance benefits hitting the trust fund. And that number that gets echoed throughout this report of paying out $388 million in benefits directly from this trust fund, that $388 million is going to be the key number for the next 10 years, assuming we don't have a year worse than 2019. Let's all hope and pray that we do not have a year worse than 2019. Excuse me, 2020. Sorry, a year worse than 2020. So that $388 million, as the way statute is written, is going to be the number we're going to use to calculate how much or which tax rate schedule we should be at, which is, I tried to prepare, this is, a conversation we typically dance around, and we normally don't always put these numbers straightforward. I don't know why, but in this situation, I thought it was important. So you'll see at the top of page 9, I just laid it right out there. Like, because we're so close and on top of this, it makes it a lot easier to, let's say, simplify the calculation. So, it's in 2020 dollars, and it is a placeholder for what will occur in July 2021 when we make the determination of which tax rate schedule you're at. But you can see what the trust fund now, based on a bad year of $388 million, is going to look for to get us from Schedule 5 to Schedule 4 to Schedule 3, Schedule 2, Schedule 1. And as I previewed a week or so ago, to get back to Schedule 1, we're going to be looking at like approximately $1 billion. And I think this is where some conversations with Senator Clarkson, Senator Rahm started occurring.
Matt, I have a question. It seems like we've set this trigger with or setting going forward with an aberrant year. Maybe that's precisely why the formula looks back 10 years to the worst year. But is that a federal law or is that a state law?
I would defer to Cam, but my understanding is it's state statute in terms of how the calculation is written.
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of anything in federal statute that requires us to look back 10 years. I can dig in and double check, but I'm not aware of anything that requires us, as we calculate our formula, to do that. I think a lot of states calculate it differently, and I don't think it requires at least a 10-year look back.
Has there any thought been given to changing that part of the statute? It seems pretty conservative to me in the sense that it's protecting against the worst year in 10 years, but I'm not sure people envisioned a 100-year pandemic into driving this train for the next 10 years.
Certainly, and that's a valid point. And I would just say quickly, historically, business cycles are about every 6 to 8 years. And a 10-year look back made a lot of sense because you'd capture the last recession. What we've seen in the last 3 recessions is that the duration between them is getting longer and longer and getting deeper and deeper when they occur. And this one was no different. So the 2007 recession, we went almost 11 years past it before we had the economic downturn.
Which was not caused by, it was caused by the pandemic, not by something that happened internal to the market or to, obviously the impact, it had an external precipitating factor rather than a internal market factor, which is also unusual.
Yeah, let's just, as we go forward, we might want to think about that as an additional fix. I mean, it just came to mind as you were talking, so it may be flawed, but it just seems like we're being driven by a 100-year event, and I'm not sure that makes sense for any of us, but let's go on. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair. Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
I can't see anybody because I'm looking at the report. So just speak up if you want to have a question.
The 10-year look back, is that consistent with what other states are doing? How do other states deal with this?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think as Cam gave a preview the other day, we're in a raise state, and I think there's only about 26 of those. So half of them wouldn't even have this, wouldn't be doing something like this. And then what the other ones are doing, I'm not sure. I see Cam grabbing his probably his ETA guide comparing, or Employment and Training Administration guide comparing UI laws. We can certainly look into that and figure that out, and try and get back to you. I'm not sure how other states do it.
Yeah, Senator
Well,
Brock,
what I'm
if I
looking
don't find
for
some,
is the implications if we used a different look back, if we went back 7 years and so on, what the implications would be to the amount of charges.
Yeah, I think we could run some what if scenarios because we were just almost at that point. I was previewing this conversation before we knew about the global health pandemic when I was here last year, and we were talking about the health of the trust fund. We were talking about how the worst year, 2009, was going to fall out of the books. So we were not going to be able to use that worst year because it wasn't part of the 10-year look back. And as a result, the trust fund's balance just, this table showing how much money does the trust fund want to be at schedule 1 through 5, because there was no bad year in its look back, it was saying, oh, we don't need very much money. And so it was ramping down contributions as much as it could. Even so, it still was cash positive just because of the way the structure of our taxable wage base was versus our level of contributions. So we could have walked that forward just to see what happens, because the only time you really get to that, is if you're past that 10-year look back. So, that worst year is gone and you've had that opportunity to, that means you've had 10 years of positive economic growth in theory, unless I got to be careful because before the pandemic, I couldn't imagine a scenario like this. And so I can't imagine certain scenarios of which we wouldn't have a bad year, but 10 years later, we wouldn't be in a good position, if that makes sense. We had 10 years economic recovery. The trust fund, in theory, should be quite healthy. And therefore, even if we said we didn't need a lot, we could wait. It would just kind of trickle along until we had a bad year. That would trigger a different calculation. So it could be one of those things of it's not an issue unless you have this large one-off event that we all hope doesn't occur ever again. But even so, and so I think this is kind of that debate about how much should be in the trust fund. And this is the public policy question. Should it be $1? Should it be 300 million? Should it be 500 million? Should it be $1 billion? And I think this is where the conversation about where we are in the economic recovery, we still have a lot of uncertainty. And so when we look at how this table, the bottom table on page 9, looking at the actual forecast, when we talk, and I do have some stuff I can submit in comparison. We just, because of this week is kind of derailed for VDOL leadership, so we haven't had a chance to review the analysis and the write-up associated with this. But I have a comparable table which will show, in essence, how this looks. And first and foremost, you got to remember that when we're talking about the benefits paid, that's going to be the same in these two scenarios. And I just want to point out, we have this. We're projecting 387 million was 2020's level, and we're projecting, I'm hoping it's less, but I can imagine a situation which it would be more, which is hard to believe. But we pay out about $158 million in 2021, but that would put us just slightly cash negative in this year. For comparison, in 2009, we paid out $200 million, and in 2010, because that recession was deep and long, 2010 we did about 150 million. So in the two worst years of the last recession, we did $350 million in benefits over 2 years. Last year in 9 months, we did $388 million in benefits. So you can see just how bad this year was. But because of the way everything's structured, how the federal programs are acting, it's going to be difficult for us to pay out of state obligations at this point, unless we have a really bad surge back in COVID, which I wouldn't be able to scope out. And to some extent, the trust fund would not fare as worse during another surge, because many of the people who have been dislocated because of the initial surge are still dislocated, right? We still know that 40 to 50% of the leisure and hospitality industry has not come back to work in its full capacity, right? So those people can't be fired twice or let go twice because of a resurge. So we're at a lower point in our economy trying to recover. We're down 10% overall in the economy. We're down 10% of our employment from where we were a year ago. So even if another surge came down, we'd batten down the hatches some, but it would not lead, I don't think, to as much of a dislocation of employment. So these claims, we're projecting that if we have a slow, steady recovery, we'll be kind of marching out in a couple of years and be cash positive by 2022 in the trust fund. So these contributions, you know, as the chair points out, they jump right up because the way the calculation is written currently, we will go from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5 because the way the calculation says, what's the worst year you've had in the last 10 years? It was clearly last year. Based on that calculation, we need at least $388 million in the trust fund to be below Schedule 5. And right now we don't have that.
So
Now,
Matt,
as you look at
can I interrupt, Matt? I'm sorry, maybe my voice doesn't come across that clearly, but when you say 2021 on this chart on page 9, that is starts on July 1st? I mean, we haven't gone to Schedule 5 yet, have we?
Correct. So that will be July, and the notes and all this, because it's presented as calendar year data, but the little notes will indicate when that actually occurs. So calendar year in 2021 in July will be effective when we jump to Schedule 5 if nothing is done.
Okay, so is it a fair assumption or a close assumption that if we did what the governor is proposing and kept it at Schedule 1 for 2021, the contributions would be more in the range of 117 million?
Correct.
Okay. Got it.
Senator Brock?
Ask, yes, another question. The fund balance, is that invested?
It is held by the federal government and it is interest bearing. So like, for example, in 2020, I think we accrued about $10 million in interest.
You know what the rate is that being applied? Is it a federal rate? It's not being invested as, for example, pension funds might be. Is that correct?
Correct. So it gets about 2.3%, I think is the last number I had, which isn't nothing to sneeze at.
It's still like slightly greater than inflation. And I was just really looking at the climb at the maximum weekly benefit, which I assume is inflation adjusted.
The maximum weekly benefit is actually based on the change in the average quarterly wage across all covered employment in the Vermont economy. So it is not based on inflation. So it's based on how other wages change.
Well, isn't the average covered wage, though, based on inflation?
No.
What's it based on?
Inflation, typically thought of as the consumer price index or CPI, is a basket of goods where they track the price of those basket of goods.
Yep.
What we're talking about would be covered wages. So what are the wages that Vermont businesses are reporting for their covered employment? We put that we capture all the wages that are reported to us, divided by the number of people that are receiving those wages to come up with an average wage. So it'd be the change in the average wage.
Well, why would it go from $531 in 2020 to $776 in 2031 if inflation weren't the factor that was driving that? Is there something else that's driving an increase in wages that would result in an increase in the maximum weekly benefit?
That's a great question. Great economic question too, about wages versus CPI or inflation. A lot of times
of inflation, but there's nothing else going on aside from wage inflation, is there? That would cause that change?
Well, you're hoping that your population base is able to become more productive, that technology is able to be utilized in a better way. And as such, that's typically what drives wage growth is the population.
That's what I'm just trying to get at is where does that number come from? Who arrives how?
Can I jump in? Because I think Matt tried to answer this. It is an inflationary increase, but it's not based on the traditional CPI. It's based upon how much wages go up in the state. We do that for a lot of labor programs, like workers' comp as well has a maximum that's tied to the average, how much the wages go up in a year. So sometimes, this is like income inequality 101. I mean, sometimes wages don't even keep pace with inflation. Other times they go up faster than inflation. But I wouldn't be surprised that it's fairly close to the CPI but it may be slightly different. So,
Yeah, and
Well,
I'll just,
I'm really just trying to understand where these numbers are coming from and who arrived at them. I mean, there's a 31.5% change in the weekly benefit. Now, I could, apply a CPI to it and see if it's about the same, but just who decides what these numbers are? Do you know?
this forecast falls on my shoulders alone. And if I will let you know that I added that column strictly for illustrative purposes. It actually does not flow through to the claimants and the trust fund itself. There is an assumption built in here that it would be about a 3 to 3.5% increase annually. That's what we've seen over the last few years because we have demographic challenges associated with a constricting labor force, no population growth. The competition for labor has increased. As such, employers are responding to that by paying higher wages. In addition, the minimum wage has been increased statutorily beyond the CPI. As such, that we are seeing potential ripple effects from that as well. So people earning minimum wage are coming through and getting higher rates of increase. And again, it's only the people receiving wages. So if there was any sort of people who are outside not receiving benefits or wages, then they're not part of this calculation. And I'll let you know that the way this calculation is done, I didn't want to, I struggled getting out of the go box on this forecast because there's so many assumptions that we typically use to build this forecast. What's the unemployment rate going to be? What is the labor force going to do? What are wages going to do? All of that is a complete unknown right now because of the way the pandemic has disrupted these, not even just the real life world factors, but the economic factors that are actually in the calculation. So let's say, for example, that we get the green light to reopen the economy. There's a big celebration in the streets. COVID-19 is behind us, and everyone gets hired on December 1. Everyone goes back to work December 1 of this year. Well, their wages are going to look really, really tiny. And we're going to put in, 30, 40, 50,000 wages looking like they have an annual wage of maybe $2,000. That could significantly disrupt the way the maximum weekly benefit is calculated. I could see a scenario where it goes negative, and we haven't discussed any of the statute doesn't address this. We addressed it one time in the minimum wage maybe 5 years ago when the CPI went negative. And I think statutorily there was a change, but I don't know what happens to average weekly wage going forward right now because there's so many unknowns about how we're going to recover from this. So it is completely a forecast. I would be happy to put, less a forecast, more of a guess, and just a placeholder for discussion purposes. And I'd be happy to put in, a different number, but they are tied. I'll let you know, maximum weekly benefit and taxable wage base are increasing at the same rate in this table. The taxable wage base does impact how contributions is collected, but I will say that maximum weekly benefit in this is for illustrative purposes and does not flow to benefits. I had to model at a higher level than the detail we normally would do. I apologize if you hear screaming.
In terms of doing your forecast, how frequently is the forecast updated? Is it annual?
This one, for this purpose, we do it once a year for a long-term 10-year. That's just kind of what's been handed to me is like, do a year, once a year, do a 10-year forecast. During the pandemic, we were doing them about once every 2 or 3 weeks. We were only doing 1 to 2 year forecasts. Initially, when this pandemic happened, the commissioner immediately had Cam and I working on this to start discussing what does the trust fund look like at the end of 2021. So I have many iterations of forecasts and updates throughout the calendar year 2020, looking at the trust fund balance and where we thought it was going to go based on utilization at that time. And I will say from early forecasts, it's every marker we've hit, it's always been a little better. So every time we started forecasting something, we check in on it 3, 4, 5 weeks later, and it'd be trending better, trending better, trending better. And a lot of that is the absorption of benefits into the federal programs that are picked up by the federal government themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Matt, continue.
So just continuing on with the discussion, focusing on column D under employers' contributions with the contribution rate, kind of as the chair indicated, we have Schedule 4, or we jumped from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5 in 2021, absent intervention, and it would be Schedule 5 for the next 3 years. And you see these big dollar amounts, approaching $190 million that would be collected from Vermont employers. And, at that point, you would start seeing the trust fund realize it has enough in terms of money, and it would start ratcheting down to Schedules 4, 3, 2, 1, and the like. And the boxes, again, correspond to the balance in the trust fund based on the table above showing what schedule that would trigger. Once it hits Schedule 3, there'd be a 2,000 reduction. And I would be curious, Mr. Chair, if that was your understanding in the grand bargain, but that's a side conversation for later, because I did not recognize that was still in effect. So and we will get you the updated table with the administration's proposal as quick as we can, hopefully later today, if not early tomorrow morning. But what it does is it basically moves all this out. So, instead of surging in contributions in 21, 22, and 23, it moves the money out almost to the end because it just pushes it out, everything a little bit. So as opposed to going from 1 to 5 and then down, it goes from 1, 3, 5, and then down. And so it looks a little bit more like a bell curve as opposed to a single tail, like a spike and then trail off. And
that raises a question for me. I thought the administration's proposal was to freeze it for a year at 1. Last year, the proposal was to go from 1 to 3 to 5, but they've become more aggressive in keeping it at 1 for an entire year as opposed to going to 3. Is that not your understanding of the proposal?
What I modeled is my understanding of the proposal is that they would do 3 things. 1, freeze the schedule at tax rate Schedule 1 for a year. 2, they would put in a provision that says the tax rate schedule cannot jump by more than 2 schedules in any given year. So, and then 3, freeze the taxable wage base for 1 year at 14,100. So there would not be an index up in 2022.
So your answer to this question may be helpful. We're dealing with a lot of bills, including S10, trying to extend policy choices we made last year because the pandemic has gone on much longer and much deeper than anybody thought. It seems counterintuitive to me that the administration would hit the trust fund harder this year in this proposal than they did last year in the summer, given that we now know that the pandemic is getting or is worse than expected. It would seem they would ease up on that pressure on the trust fund as opposed to hitting it harder.
I can, I'll let the administration handle their specific rationale. From what I've been privy to conversations and what I've seen as far as how the numbers work out, in essence, what they would be saying is that, if we can get through 2021 with $200 million, if we can get through 2022 with $300 million, we're in good shape. We don't want to take that money in the form of contributions out of the Vermont economy and put them in this piggy bank that can only be used for benefits. So just like you said, Chair, in 2021, the difference being, actually I have the number, we're in the current legislative statutes as written, we're going to be collecting or projected to collect $146 million in contributions. If we freeze the tax rate schedule, we'd only be collecting a little under $110 million. So that difference being $35 million that Vermont employers would not have to send into this this holding account, this trust fund used for paying benefits. And so it would be, in theory, money that would remain in the economy to help those businesses get through this tough period. I liken it to a retirement account for individuals, right? If you were hit hard in your ability to earn money, you might ramp down what you're contributing to retirement because you can't get that money out until you're retired without tax penalties and things like that. And so, this is a rainy day fund, and in some ways it's raining.
Okay, I think what you said may have come out a little curious, let's put it that way, to my ears, because I think what you said, they don't want to leave money in the trust fund that could only be used for benefits. What's wrong with using that money for enhanced benefits?
You're on mute, Matt.
Oh, enhanced benefits, that's changing the conversation completely. I have that again, you're.
That's
stepping into
outside your bailiwick, but it came across.
I was just talking situation normal. We would have, we'll be slightly cash negative in 2021 and would be cash positive in 2022, but the trust fund itself would be able to pay its obligations as forecasted currently. If you're looking to change the benefit stream, that's something I would have to look into in terms of what the proposals were to provide numbers to help the conversation. Again, I have no opinion on that.
Thank you. I mean,
Mr. Chair,
that's
and
helpful.
I can speak
Okay.
to this just a little bit. I mean, our concern right now is as we look at the modeling, as we anticipate what's going to happen, the tax rates are going to go from 1 to 5. And as we testified in September of last year, that's going to be a tripling of the tax rates for the vast majority of Vermont employers. As I mentioned, I think a few times ago, when we were originally talking about the tax rate, schedule, the vast majority of the Vermont employers live at the high end of the tax rate schedule. So they live with the lowest tax rate. And that's where we see the highest jump. It triples from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5. So our concern as we came in last September is ensuring that as we try to recover from this pandemic, the recession that we're in, we want to ensure that the money is in employers' hands so they can hire individuals back into employment. The thing that we're concerned about is just this becoming, kind of exacerbating itself where we increase taxes to pay back into the UI trust fund and employers then aren't able to even bring the individuals back to work potentially. So what we've seen from September to now is, as we mentioned back in September, there was a lot of concern about where we were at with the pandemic. And I think our position at the time was, we were comfortable with at least limiting the tax increase because our concern too was we didn't know what the winter was going to look like. And keep in mind that was in September where we were still seeing decreasing claims at a higher rate than we were actually projecting them at the time. So now that we've gone, through the winter's not over, but, we're in at least February here. We've seen an extension of, programs at the federal level. I think, we all anticipate some form of additional extension potentially coming through. We feel that modeling it further, we feel that we will have sufficient funds in the trust fund to keep it at tax schedule 1, preferring to keep that money in the economy in the employer's hands so they can bring their individuals back to work. That's what we've looked at on the employer side because we're concerned, like I said, about the tax increase there. As far as, giving out some, additional benefit to claimants, we would have to have that conversation with the committee. And I know it's something that you, Mr. Chair, have identified as being a priority for you. And so that I think was our approach here, was to come in and say, we would like to keep things at tax schedule 1 to ensure a recovery through 2021, hopefully getting people back to work. And if that involves a conversation on, additional benefits for claimants, then that's a conversation we have with the committee. Because obviously the committee, the legislature is the one that has to enact this change. We cannot do it. If we leave everything alone, we anticipate going to Schedule 5, and there's nothing that the department can do to prohibit that from happening. So I just, I'm happy to let the commissioner speak for himself, but I just wanted to give that context a little bit. I mean, we're 5 months from where our last projections were, and I think we feel that, we've weathered those 5 months better than a worst case scenario, and so we feel we're in a little bit better position at this point.
Good. Thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Does anybody else have any questions? I'm looking to see if Doug Hoffer has joined us, or if we received anything more from the AG's office, and I don't see either. Do you want to go on?
Yeah, the final chart is, it would be.
I'm sorry, I can't see people, so just speak up. Senator Clarkson, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just would love to, if Matt's able to finish, it would be great. And sort of discuss this final chart, which you had raised at the beginning, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I don't have much too much more to add. Just that, you know, this forecast depends on the contributions is a little bit more stable as far as how we forecast those out, you know, and if we want to change schedules, change taxable wage base, that number is a little bit more solid as it relates to the forecast. Obviously, the variability comes in the benefits paid. And so, you know, we're not sure, you know, barring any conversation, you know, putting aside any conversation about changing the benefits or enhancing the benefits, I'm just saying in terms of the upside and downside of this forecast or in the benefits themselves. We certainly hope that there is a full recovery from this economic downturn to the point where we would be getting back to paying under $100 million in benefits, because that would put us in a situation where the trust fund would be significantly cash positive over the next few years and continue to add to its overall balance, moving us through the tax rate schedules. So again, just highlighting that there's a lot of uncertainty as it relates to how the economy is going to respond and how COVID is going to progress. But I think that was the highlights of what I wanted to discuss in this report. And certainly would welcome questions or additional scenarios that people would like to see modeled.
Thank you very much, Matt. We're obviously going to have a lot of questions, a lot of moving parts here as we get into the administration's proposal, which I'm sympathetic to, but I want to see some balance as
Right.
Cameron has mentioned. So
Doug
I
Hopper.
promised the auditor that I would get him in and out. He has other meetings, but I think we just want to have a brief conversation with him about what he sees, and I will say that he's already said to me that he's also on a learning curve here in terms of what the direction this is going to go. So we can ask some questions. He can give us whatever he can, but we're only going to keep him for 5 minutes because he has other calls. And then we'll take a break for 10 minutes after that. So Mr. Auditor, welcome. I like your golf shirt. It looks good. I can't hear you.
You're muted. Doug, you're muted.
Yeah, I saw Matt was wearing a tie. I feel bad.
So let me just start off. Why don't you take a few minutes and tell us what you know at this point, however little that might be, and I'm sure the committee's going to have a few thoughts and questions for you to take away anyhow.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know any more than you do. I mean, I read the article, and Linda in my office watched Mr. Harrington's testimony, Commissioner Harrington's testimony yesterday. It doesn't seem like it's all that complicated, but I shouldn't say more than that until I know more. We plan to talk with them, if not today, then tomorrow. We're interviewing a firm that we already work with that I believe is perfectly capable of doing this work. And the upside of that is that we already have them under contract. This is the firm that we use to do the audit of the state's financial statements and the single audit. And as part of the CAFR, they always do some IT work. So they're perfectly capable, especially since this doesn't sound like something that requires the high level expertise of Barry Dunn or some of these other major IT groups. So I'm anxious to get into it, but I just don't know much more than that at this time. But I'm happy to take questions.
So I guess I have a question I have. I mean, could it be as simple? I think Senator Brock was talking about this, that somehow a column from an Excel spreadsheet by human error got put in a different column, and all the addresses were off by one line, and that's what you hope to find out and understand why it happened and how it could be corrected in the future? Is that essentially your role?
Yeah, that's what we've heard, like you have from the commissioner. And if so, that suggests, not that it's an outrageous mistake, but it's the kind of thing that you would catch if you were doing adequate testing before sending them out. And, it doesn't do any good to point fingers, but that's not a complicated process. This is an unusual event because, the department obviously always deals with UI and does mailings all the time. I gather this is a result of them trying to work with a new data set, which were many, in most cases, the people who are new to the system this year, the self-employed and all those folks, and they didn't adequately merge the two systems. And not only that, but they didn't test it before they went out to do it. So it seems,
You muted yourself again, Doug.
sorry, so we won't know anymore until we get into the job. And if we use the people that are already under contract to us, CLA, we could get started very quickly. And I would hope that we would have an answer, sooner rather than later. If we have to go outside and hire it, everything takes a little bit longer, as you know. And I hope that we can do this as a GAGAS audit. That's a little bit of work for our staff in-house, but not that much. And the advantage of using CLA is because they already do GAGAS work. So that seems like the easiest and most appropriate approach. And I'm hoping that's the way it's going to come out.
Doug, is there any distinguishing to be had between your office doing it? I mean, I guess there's your office, there's somebody under contract, or the legislature hiring somebody. Any of the ways, it's going to be an independent audit or an independent investigation, as opposed to an in-house investigation by the department itself, right?
Yeah, the nuts and bolts of the work would be exactly the same. I'm not sure why the legislature would get involved. If you want true independence, it should be through us, and it should meet GAGAS standards. JFO is perfectly capable of hiring consultants, as you know, and they often get good product, but they don't do GAGAS audits. We do. That's the only significant difference. This is not that complicated a job, at least based on what I know today. But I think if you want it independent, it should be us and not JFO.
Senator Brock?
I would agree with the auditor. It's imperative that there be credibility to what's done, and having an independent auditor do this under generally accepted government auditing standards, which is GAGAS, is critical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions before we break? Doug has other commitments, the auditor has other commitments, and I've already started the scheduling for next week. We're going to be monitoring this fairly closely over the next week or two. So we'll probably be hearing briefly again from Doug next week. Did you have any last minute gems on mini TIFs before I'll give you an opportunity?
I sent that memo over just on that one issue. But before we finish on the DOL, you guys are the ones that have expressed the most interest, and I will be happy to keep you posted every step of the way on what we're doing.
Great.
Right. Thank
Right.
you.
You're very welcome.
Okay, and thanks for showing up today, Doug. Okay, so we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to move to mini TIFs, I think.
Is there any way, Nathan, could you